So first thing to say is a very warm welcome to you. If you're new to Newtown Evangelical Church, it's great to have you with us for our hot potato evening. And a particular welcome to Gian, who's come over from Tywyn, and his wife Raj. It's lovely to have them. I'll be interviewing Gian in a minute, and then he'll be speaking. And then after that, there'll be opportunity for some questions. So Ben is just going to explain how we'll operate the question part of the evening, what you have to do if you want to submit questions. Okay, over to you, Ben.
All right, yeah, good evening, everybody. If you've been to one of our hot potato evenings in the last couple of years, you'll be familiar with this, but we're going to operate questions via Slido. So if you do have a smartphone with you, please simply open your browser and go to slido.com. And you don't need to sign up or anything. You just type in the code, which is hot potato. So there'll be a hashtag already there. You just type in hot potato, and it will take you to a screen where you can just type your question in. And you can make it anonymous, or you can put your name, entirely up to you. The other helpful thing about that is that you can see, if you go to that address, you can see all of the questions that other people have already submitted, and you can click like if you think that's a good question. And I can see when I come to field the questions, there are like 4 people who would like me to ask this question to Gian, because we might not have time to ask every question because we're going to be hungry, all right? Just one thing to add, though. Last time, there were 1 or 2 comments about, I haven't got a smartphone. It's not fair that I don't get to ask a question. We want to make sure everybody can ask a question. What I intend to do in a moment is I'll grab some bits of paper and put them on the tables with a pen. If you've got a question that you want to ask, jot it on that piece of paper. If there's somebody else on your table who's got a smartphone, perhaps they can type it in, or perhaps 1 or 2 of us can keep an eye for any that we can add on our smartphones, and they can be added in to the mix with everybody else's. It's just a much more helpful way because we get to avoid complete off-topic questions, because they do happen. And I get to see, it's not about me giving preferential treatment over which questions I think are the best. Actually, there are some questions which are just totally irrelevant, all right? And we want to be able to field those out and make sure that you get a chance to see which questions are most helpful. So that's how we're going to do it. I'm going to hand over to Tim, and we'll get on with the evening. Thank you.
Great. So again, fantastic to see you, and thought it'd be helpful, so you've got some sort of context for when Gian starts speaking to us about the uniqueness of Jesus, that if you understood a bit about his background, about how he's got to where he is today. So I'm just going to ask 2 or 3 questions to get him going, as it were, in sharing his story. So you were a Sikh before you became a Christian. So what did that actually mean? I guess a lot of us here are not familiar with Sikhism. What did that mean for you when you were a teenager or a young man being a Sikh?
For me, growing up in a Sikh/Hindu family, the one thing I suppose you have to understand is that although we would say we are Sikh, but we also encompass Hinduism as well as many other religions into the house. So predominantly it was Sikhism. And so for me, we was brought up in a household that attended the local Gurdwara, which is the temple. Some places are called temples, but the actual name is a Gurdwara, which is the place of worship. So we would go to the Sikh Gurdwara, and we would have our day, which would be on a Sunday, predominantly between the hours of 10 a.m. in the morning till about 1 to 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So we'd have the meeting in the morning, and then we'd have langar, which is food that is served in the Gurdwara to everybody, which is completely free. So we'd be having food in the afternoon, and then we'd all make our way home. Right.
So as Christians, we're sort of familiar with a lot of people in this country sort of call themselves Christians, but it's pretty nominal. So your Sikhism, was that a serious thing, or was that just, hey, look, this is part of my culture growing up?
I think initially from growing up, it was part of my culture or my identity that I associated with. it was something for me that, in terms of searching for God, I was always taught by my parents to understand that there is a God, and that we need to understand who God is, and that is what the essence of Sikhism is about, trying to understand who God is and what's involved in terms of how God is pleased with you, or what you need to do in order to please God. So for us, although I wasn't from the outward appearance a Sikh, I didn't have the beard, I didn't have the turban, I didn't have the heavy gara, which is a bangle that they wear. I didn't have the kirpan, which is a small sword. That is generally given to those in what I suppose you would call people who are baptized. That would be the similar meaning for those, which would be Amrit Shak, which is to be saying that you are sort of set aside and you are a true follower of Sikhi. Or we say Sikhism, but we would say Sikhi, which is following the Sikh way of life.
So how did someone from that background, how did you first come into contact with Christianity?
I suppose my initial contact was at school, going to the RE classes, I think. That's what they used to call them. I don't know what they call them today, but
Right.
back in our school, everybody used to call them RE, religious education classes. And so there we were taught a sort of broad spectrum of different religions, as well as Christianity. But that was taken as part and parcel to me, was that it's knowing or trying to find out about God. So it didn't matter who it was or what it was ultimately about God.
So as a Sikh, sort of the idea of, sort of all roads lead to God and embrace was sort of...
It pretty much is, in the sense that the only thing that sort of sets Sikhism apart from, say, Hinduism is the fact that there is only one creator, there is only God, the creator, there is only one. So from a Christian perspective, Jewish perspective, or Islamic perspective, Sikhism also stood on the ground that there is only one God, whereas Hinduism has a completely different look on that.
Okay, so you were a Sikh. You knew a little bit from RE lessons about Christianity, but hey-ho, I could just integrate that into the existing worldview, the way of understanding things. So how did things change?
Yeah, for me, the change came about really in terms of searching for God. I understood the concept that there is a greater being. There is something or someone that has created what we see today. Someone has created the world. Someone has created the stars in the sky. Someone has created the sun, the moon, the planets, and us, ultimately. And the question was, who is that someone? We taught about God. God is the one who has created everything that is, and God has created us. And then the question mark then was, the next question is, who is that God? Where is that God? And then how do I find that God? And that's where the search for that triggered in me by really just spending more time at the Gurdwara on the Sunday. So I'd be religiously involved in getting there early in the morning. Traditionally, my day would start at around about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. I'd be the first one there to open up. I'd be the first one to lay out the sheets in their worship hall. I'd be the first one to put initial stuff in the kitchen ready. Tea was always the thing that was always happening. So all of that used to happen while I used to be there. So I'd probably be one of the first to actually do all of that in my eagerness to really search out where God was, because I was told God is here, God resides here. And so for me, the desire was to, well, if God resides there and God is there, then that's where I need to be. And so that desire always used to sort of push me to get out of bed early on a Sunday and spend that time on the Sunday in God's house. And so for me, that was that time, and then we'd have a time of sort of questions and answers, if you like, and worship together with the priest. So before everybody else used to come, that was my time for really questioning and asking questions about God and his creation. And the answers always used to come back very vague in terms of the character of God, who God is, where do we fit into the cycle of things. And it was always difficult for the priest to really explain how we were created, for what purpose, and where we are at. And so the answers always used to come back that it was always an act of works. You know, we're born to do good works. You know, we're there to help those who need the help. We're there to support those who are being persecuted. We are there to stand up against tyranny. We are there to be honest and hardworking. All these things, to do good works, was key to having a relationship with God. And so everything was heavily centered around works. It was all driven by works. Which you look at it and you think, you know what, that's great, it's fantastic. And you think, well, you know, that's what I'm doing. I'm striving to do the best I can as an individual to do exactly those things, to love, to have humility, to do what I think is right, to stand up for those who are being wronged, to stand in the place of those who are being bullied or pressured and whatever, to be a voice for those who haven't got a voice. And that was the general sort of upbringing that I'd had. So my attitude on other things would be, you know, so much in such a way that if people were being bullied or if people were being picked on or anything like that, I'd be the first one to stand up and address and challenge those who were doing those things, being encouraged by the fact that, you know, to stand up for something that is right, then God is on your side. So you cannot fail in that respect. You're victorious. And so that's where you may see images in Sikhism today, even, you know, where some of them, you know, they're known as the warrior clans. You know, they're great warriors and fighters for defending what is right and all of these things. And so that side of things, you know, comes out in you because that's what you see, that's what you read, and it's all about doing good works. That was the key element to all of that.
You got a religion that was doing good works, doing good deeds, but a very vague understanding of what God was actually like.
Characteristics of God, or understanding who God was, just felt so far away. It felt distant. You know, here I am doing all these things and striving to do these things, and other people are coming along and patting you on the back and saying you're doing a really good job. They're telling your parents, oh, your son's, you know, absolutely fantastic. He's brilliant. He's here doing this. He's doing that, and it's all about the works. And but for me, the question was, I'm doing all of this, but I don't know where God is with me. Everybody else is telling me that I'm doing really good. You know, everything, the feedback that comes back is, you're great. It's going wonderful. But for me, the question was not so much about people, but it was, where is God in what I'm doing? How do I know?
So what changed?
Yeah, so for me, that question was that one of the days I was sitting there, I was sitting in the worship hall on my own. The front doors and everything was locked. The only access into the building was through the back, through the kitchen, and then into the main worship hall. So I was sitting right at the back at the hall, and I was just really questioning these things with God, and I'm sort of saying, well, God, if you're really there, how is it that I feel that you're just so far away from me? How is it that I feel that there's no communication with you? I feel that I'm doing all these other things, but the real reason why I'm doing all of these is for me to know that I'm on the right path. I've got God saying, I've got you, I know where you are, I know who you are, and I want to have that relationship with you. But it was that where I was sitting and questioning God, really, and saying, well, God, if you're there, where are you? Or if you're here, where are you? Because I'm doing everything so far to please men, and me thinking that I'm pleasing you as well, because that's what I've been taught, that's what I've been told, but yet that relationship isn't there. So it was a question of questioning God and saying, if you're God, if you're there, then where are you? And it was at that point that just heard a voice saying, what are you doing here? And I ignored it, and I first thought, maybe somebody outside has said something to somebody, and didn't really pay much attention to that. And went back to really just questioning God again and pointing my finger and sort of, saying, I'm doing all of this and I'm getting nowhere. I don't know where you are. Are you avoiding me, or what is it? What am I doing wrong? Questions. And God, if you're really there, then, where are you? And again, then the second time round, a voice came and said, what are you doing here? And this time it came louder, and it felt as though somebody was saying something to me just in the atrium over there where the doors were closed behind me. And it felt as though somebody was in that room. And I thought, that's a bit strange, because I haven't opened the doors to the Gurdwara, so they're all closed. But I sort of flung the door open to just make sure nobody was there. And everything was as it was. The doors were locked and nobody was there. The room, the atrium area, was all completely empty. And that sort of shook me a bit. And I thought, oh, wow, okay. But went back to just again pondering, questioning, asking God, where are you? I'm still waiting for an answer. I need to know where I am with you. I'm doing fine with everything else. I'm ticking all the boxes, but just not sure about you. Where are you? And then the third time, the voice came, and literally it was as though somebody was standing right next to me over my shoulder and just literally said, "What are you doing here?" And at that point, I thought, okay, something's not right here. And I don't know what it was. I can't really honestly say, but for me, it just meant that I couldn't be where I was. The compulsion was to leave. And so I ended up getting up. I grabbed my shoes and then took my head covering off and everything, grabbed my shoes, put my shoes on, and I just ended up walking home. So I ended up getting home and about 8:30 in the morning, and normally I'm back home at about 5 in the afternoon. And my mother said to me, she says, "Are you okay?" I said, I'm fine. And all I remember was I just ended up going upstairs, going into my bedroom, locking the door, and I had been given at school the Gideon's Bible, and it was free. So it was, for me, I thought, wow, that's free, that's fantastic, So I thought, right, I'll have that, thank you very much. Not really knowing exactly what was given to me. Some of my friends didn't want it. They was like, well, I don't want this. And I said, well, if you won't have it, I'll have it. So I ended up walking home with 3 Gideon's Bible that day. And for me back then, it just didn't make sense, but I hid them in my room. And I can't say why, I just hid them in my room thinking if my mum or my dad find them, they're just going to be like, what are you doing with these? You don't need this. So I hid them in my room, and like I say, when I went back into my bedroom, locked the door, looked for the Gideon's Bible that were hidden, wasn't there. My mother had found it and chucked it away. Went to the second hiding place, and the Bible wasn't there neither. And then finally went to my third hiding place, and that Bible was there. So I had the New Testament from the Gideons, a little red book. Some of you might remember that. I had that book, and I sat down, and I just remember all I did was just started reading Matthew, and then just spent the next 5 hours just reading the New Testament. And the more I read it, the more it spoke to me and lifted me up from the inside. The more the questions that I wanted to ask were slowly being answered without anybody really saying anything to me. But the New Testament, the more I read, the more it became alive to me. The more I wanted to know more about it, the more I wanted to read, the more I wanted to get involved, and understanding that suddenly there was this book in my hand that was actually giving me a huge amount of answers to an awful lot of questions I had when I was looking at or wanting to know who God is and where is my relationship with God, and how do I know that my relationship with God is actually real? How do I know that? And the more I read, the more it became clearer and clearer and clearer that this is the God that you have been searching for and looking for.
Great. And I know you're going to be speaking in a minute, so you'll explain more about what you discovered in terms of the uniqueness of Jesus. So at what point, you're home, you're reading the Bible, you're reading for hours, you're finding what you're looking for in who God is and how do I relate to him, how do I respond to him. At what point did you say, I've become a Christian?
Right. So from probably around about 15, that was when I started reading the New Testament. And it took me a while to get to the point of really standing up and saying that I'm going to make my commitment to Christ. Between the age of 15 up to the age of 21, oddly enough, for a short period of time, I thought I was the only Indian that was Christian because I didn't know anybody else as relatives and family that were Christian. So I thought, wow, how do I handle this? Because it looks like I'm the only one. I don't think there's any other Indians that are as Christians. And because we'd grown up in a sort of bubble, I suppose, where we were not really exposed to Asians that were Christians. And so for me, it was that fear of like, I'm the only one that's a Christian. I'm the only Indian that's a Christian. And certainly in Wolverhampton, it seems like I'm the only one that's a Christian, So it was, little did I know that my church had started back in 1974. So it was one of those. So that sort of fear really sort of overshadowed everything else. And then also coupled with that was my mum and dad and the family and the community, because the community have a very strong influence on how you are and how you're to behave and what you think and what you should be doing and what you should not be doing, and all of those things, and family, relatives, and that play quite a strong part in all of that. And what made things worse for me was that my father was at one point one of the, they call them sort of the Gurdwara leader or the head of the temple as a committee, operating committee. So he had a position within the community that was considered quite high. And so therefore it was, it wasn't people looking at me, they'd be looking at me and saying, oh, that's so-and-so's son, and so you had a sort of an invisible level of understanding that you had to make sure that your behavior and your conduct was right. Yes, absolutely, because then it wasn't me that was going to be in the firing line, it would be my mother and father. So that caused a huge amount of tension with me, and because my father was quite a strict man, and he just was that way, that was his nature. And I suppose, in one sense, in many, many ways, it was a good thing that he was strict to others. But there was other things that just wasn't, we should never done that. But that was his nature. He was a strict man, and with the pressure of community, the lasting sentence always was, "What will other people say?" If you get caught doing something stupid, what will other people say? I won't be able to hold my head up high in the community. It'll be shameful, it's disgraceful, and all these things. So we had so much of that going on, but at the same time, the Lord was working in my heart, in my life. And as time went through from the age of 15 onwards, my attitudes and everything else changed. I went from being if I wanted to be aggressive, I could be quite aggressive. If I wanted to be, I'd lose my temper quite quickly as well. Me and my father never really got on. We had a sort of a love-hate relationship, really, more hate than love, and it was any opportunity to have an argument, and it would just flare up, and so the relationship wasn't fantastic. But again, for me, it was a case of I'm trying to do what I think is right based on Sikhi values and doing things. But then Christ started working and started turning my life around in terms of my character and who I was, and started shaping me into the way I needed to be. And it was only after later on through college and everything, and at the age of 21, I got to the point where I just said to the Lord, I said, I can't run from you anymore. I just can't, because I know in my heart that you are the way, that there is no other way. I'm convinced of that. There is no other way. And I need to get to a point where I have to take a stand. And the fear of that was, I know what's going to happen to me by doing that. I know the persecution that I'm going to face from family, from relatives, from friends. It's going to be really, really tough.
I know, because I've heard your story before. I know you actually took that stand. So did it play out as you expected when you...
It did, and it was also surprising as well in many ways. So by the age of 21, we got married. I married my wife, Raj. And really, after the marriage, I just got to the point where, Christ was saying to me that you're going to come to a point at a crossroads, and you're going to have to make a stand. You're going to have to decide. You're going to have to choose. What are you going to do? Are you going to live this double life? Or are you actually going to now come out and say that Christ is my Lord? Am I able to do that? And I just sort of said to the Lord, I said, look, I want to be able to, I don't want to disappoint my parents, and I don't want to put them in such a situation where they feel disgraced or dishonored and all these other things. But at the same time, I know that I have to stand up and say that I am a believer in Christ, and He is my Saviour. He is the one that I am following, and I believe in Him. And after we got married, that was the time when I thought, I've done what my parents wanted. I've honored them as much as I possibly can, but now I have to stand up for what I believe in. And that was when the persecution sort of started. Then it was just a case of just telling my parents that I'm a Christian. I'm no longer a Sikh or even loosely associated with Hinduism or anything else. I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and he is my Saviour, and I've asked him into my life, and I have a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And they just couldn't understand it. To them, the world had fell apart, the shame of it all. They were disgusted. They were absolutely angered by it. My father lost his temper many, many times with me over it. We got into so many arguments and things, but it was more so from him rather than me, because my attitude had changed. Christ had sort of said, you're not going to say anything. You're not going to retaliate. You're not going to fight back. You're not going to take the bait, as it were. You just have to act in love, because they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're saying. They're saying it, but they don't fully understand. And so that's how it was. And my character had changed from then, from being a person that was quite defiant, quite angry, would stand up to anything or anyone, not fearing anything, to someone who effectively just bowed their head and let my mother and father say their piece and everything else, and the rest of the families for that matter. But for me, it was always at the end of it all was that, they cut me off. They said, you're no longer our son has died, you're no longer welcome, this house is closed to you, the shame of it all for us, we might as well die also, because you've literally killed us. So there was an awful lot of pressure on for making you feel guilty for everything, and then pressure from other relatives, and the arguments of, why have you gone to a white person's God when we have our own God and gods? If you were lacking one God, we've got loads. Why have you gone after the white man's God? And it was it was a constant barrage of all of those things, and constant, having to go at us, and even working on my wife to have a go at me, because I think she felt the brunt of it as well, because she wasn't a believer at that point. And she felt the brunt of it because all the family were then trying to get to me through her. So she was getting dragged into all of this as well. And so it was a constant battle all the time, all kinds of threats, death threats as well. Even at one point, it was we're going to kill you. We are going to kill you. You've brought shame on the family. We are going to. It's an honor killing. You guys may have heard of honor killings and stuff, and that have gone on in the past, and the shame of it all, how do we hold our head up in the community and all this stuff.
I think we've sort of set up for you, the title for this evening is the uniqueness of Jesus. So the question that leaves, which you're going to speak for about 20 minutes now, is why is Jesus worth it? What's so special about Jesus that you'd go through all that for the sake of knowing him? So thank you so much for sharing your story. Gian and Raj will be around afterwards, so if you've got any sort of more direct questions, as well as the ones that you'll ask through Ben. So a reminder, if you've got questions, to submit them through Slido or write them on a piece of paper. But hand over to you for about 20 minutes, so great. Thanks very much.
So, Tim, thank you very much, actually, for the invite to come to join you guys this evening. So, a blessing already for me, really. I was a bit nervous at the start, wasn't sure but how it was going to be, but I feel at home and feel comfortable. So, thank you for the opportunity to share my testimony. The uniqueness of Christ. So why Jesus Christ? That was the That was a question that my father asked me, and so did many of my family members. Why Jesus Christ? And I thought, well, how do I go about explaining to them why Jesus Christ? But let me just run through some of the things that, with regards to the other religions that I've been involved with and have come from, so that you can then understand from my perspective, looking at it from a Indian person who has been involved in Sikhism and Hinduism and universalism as well, because we're really good at welcoming everybody and anybody into those who are looking to find God. If you're looking to find God, you're welcome. All paths lead to God. That has always been the statement from an awful lot of people, including my family and even myself. The argument was, you're on your path, I'm on my path. Ultimately, all paths lead to God. And so for me, it was, that's fine. I'm quite happy with that, because I'm busy trying to find my way and navigate my path to God. The questions, unfortunately, was that, how do you know that you're on the right path? Am I actually on the path that actually takes me to God? In the sense that, when I say takes me to God, does he take me to his abode? Does he take me to his place where he is? Or do I end up being somewhere else? People talk about hell. We talk about it, we say narak. We talk about hell, but we don't really talk about it an awful lot. We quite focused on looking at our path that's going to take us to God, and once we get to God, we're all right, we're fine. But that's not the case. Sikhism, started by Guru Nanak. Some of the outlines for Sikhism is that there is only one God. They believe that there is only one God, God creator. They also believe that all humans are equal. The focus is on God, the creator, hard work, and to share with others, to share your gifts with others, to please others, to help others, as I said before, to protect the rights of others, to be ready to sacrifice yourself for others too. Where we used to see that, I used to see that as myself, as I'd happily stand up for somebody that was being bullied or victimized. I'd happily go and stand and take their place and be bold enough to say to others, well, you try that with me and let's see what happens. And so that was the sort of attitudes that you grew up with, and it was all about helping those who could not help themselves, and then which came into like caring for humanity itself, to live a spiritual life, and that was a big challenge again. Spiritual life. How do you live a spiritual life? Is it focused purely on works? And with Sikhism, they work on virtues, 5 evil virtues, 5 evil things, and 5 virtues. The evil things they class as lust, rage, greed, attachment, and ego. They see those as evils. Virtues are truth, contentment, compassion, humility, and love. And the final feat is to merge with God to attain mukti, which is salvation, to have that salvation, that God would grant you that salvation and the right to be able to be in his presence. But they also then add in karma or karma. Karma being rebirths. So your works and what you do in this life count towards what is going to take you into your next life. And eventually you'll get to a point where you are doing enough good works and good things that then effectively give you salvation to be able to be in the presence of God. So with Sikhism, there is that you are compelled to do an awful lot of good. There is a compulsion within yourself to strive to do those other things, humility, love. We look at those, and the Bible talks about those things, the fruits of the Holy Spirit. But this is what they talk about, but then into that, there is such a strong emphasis on good works. We call that seva, which is to serve, to do those things, whether you're doing it in the temple or whether you're doing it outside as an individual. You're doing something for the fact that you're not going to get rewarded for it. You're doing it because you're compelled yourself to do it. Not that you want to get something out of it. There's nothing in it for me. I'm just doing it because I want to do it, because that is a way in which to get to God. So there's those things: respect the rights of others, care for all humanity, living to a high spiritual level. Good deeds is key. Salvation is by works, being good to all. But yet, the Bible talks about good works in a completely different way. There's a completely different understanding of good works and how, through Sikhism, we see good works. Being gentle, acting with humility. So you look at all of those things, and then you start to question yourself and think, well, as an individual, if I'm doing all of those things, if I'm doing what they're telling me to do, that I'm looking for truth, I'm truthful, I'm being honest, I'm content with what I have compassion, I have humility, I have love. I can fool myself into thinking that I have all those things, but really, I'm far away from all of those things. And the question mark then is, how does one actually get the help that a person needs to have compassion, to have humility, to have love, to understand love in its right way? With me, my life, it was always the case of trying to stand up to do what's right and everything else, but then there were so many wrongs that I did as well. And somehow in my head, I'd be playing a game of weighing the scales, and hopefully my good works would actually outweigh my bad works. And therefore, it sort of gets me in the good books with God. So you're playing this game of good works and bad works. And that then thrown into all of that is, well, if you do good works and God's pleased with you, in your next birth, you're going to have a better life. And then in the next one, you'll have a better life if you do better than last time. And then you carry on, but then if you didn't, you slip back. It's a bit of a game of snakes and ladders. You're not really sure, but you're hoping that you're going to get there because you're hoping that God's pleased. And so therefore, when you look at those things, you say to yourself, well, for me, that was how I used to be with the priest. And I used to say, how do I know that God's pleased with me? How do I know? You don't know me from the heart. You only know me from what you see of me. And you're making your judgment on me by what you see. And you're saying, he's a lovely lad. And you're telling my parents, he's a great lad. Asks an awful lot of questions, but he's a great lad. But for me, the question for me was, how do I address the wrong thoughts when I open my mouth and say the wrong words, when I can be vicious with my tongue, when I can get angry? How do I actually learn to control that? How does that help me where I am now? And I thought, having the works doesn't give me a relationship with God. I'm missing something here. And so that's what it is. So with Sikhism, although there's an awful lot of good, and you'd look at it and you think, oh, you know what, that's right, there is. And that's good. That's good as well. And that's good as well. But ultimately, we're talking about a relationship with God. That is the key thing. With Sikhism, it doesn't talk about creation. It doesn't explain how God created. It sort of picks up creation's happened and we're here. And so that again was another question for me as well. So how did we come about? Why did we come about? What was all that about? How does that happen? Where are we? We talk about sin, but Sikhs don't look at sin as we will be the first to say, I'm a sinner. I was born a sinner. Sikhs don't accept that. They don't accept the understanding of Christ being born over 2,000 years ago to take the punishment on the cross for my sins. They will say, why would somebody of 2,000 years ago die on the cross and take my sin? I wasn't even born. So I don't understand the concept of sin and why it's been put onto one person, and that one person has taken the sin of the whole world and my sin and done that, but I wasn't even born. And when I was born, I didn't commit no sin. So how are you saying that I'm a sinner? So the concept of understanding about sin and saying that we're all sinners, it's not quite accepted in the way in which we look at it from the Bible and say that, when the Bible talks about sin, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. They don't quite accept that in that way. And Muslims are the same. They don't do that neither. They don't accept or understand the concept of sin in that sense as well. My other sort of religion that I got involved with as well was Hinduism. Indians were really good at mixing and matching various things. Everything goes. It just sort of comes into the melting pot, and as you're growing up, you get even more confused than you were at the beginning. And when you get older, you get even more confused because it gets more complex as you get older. Even with Hinduism, I just couldn't quite understand what was actually going on with what was there and how it was happening, and then why Mum and Dad would be off to a Hindu temple, or we'd be off doing something there and then something else, and it was just a complete hodgepodge of all kinds of things. As you may know, Hinduism, some people put a figure of 330 million gods or deities. You can have anything become a deity or manifestation of God in whichever form it wants to be. You can accept that and you can have that. That's whether it's human, animal, anything, plants, trees. You can the sort of width and depth of all of that is so huge. You could spend a lifetime of trying to understand it and you still wouldn't. And so with that, putting a Hindu way into life, into culture and rituals and ceremonies and all these things, suddenly you're looking at it and thinking, hang on, can't be that all paths lead to God, surely? Because they're so far apart from each other in so many ways, but yet everybody's saying they all lead to God. And so therefore you look at that and you think, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me, but others are saying, no, this is how it is. They all lead to God. Hinduism has such a complex system of beliefs and rituals. Literally, it is the priests that would be the ones that people run to and go to for advice and guidance on what to do, how to do, when to do. All of these things are governed by the priest. I suppose you could relate it back to the day when people used to really speak about the Word of God through Latin, and the general folk never really understood Latin and didn't even understand what the person was saying. And it's the same with those guys with priests and that, with Sanskrit and other things. The complexities of the language requires a whole lifetime of study and understanding. So the general person just wouldn't grasp anything because it'd be just so complex. And so for them, it would be so much easier to go to the priest and ask them, and then the priest would literally say, well, this is what you do. And the priest would just tell them, and they would literally just obey whatever the priest said. with Hinduism, so many deities, so many manifestations of God, found in so many different ways. And again, karma, rebirth, that they talk about rebirth of 8.4 million times as something. So you start off at something from a lower species, you're reborn 8.4 million times as an idea. It will then take another 100,000 rebirths to the point of realizing that you're then into a human type of rebirth. And then after that, you've then got probably about another 7 they go with as a general guide. They'll say 7 rebirths before encountering God in his abode, or some people say nirvana or getting to that point. Although the figure 7 is not factually correct, but a lot of them say it's a godly number, and so therefore they hold on to the understanding of at the final hurdles you're down to 7 rebirths, but at the beginning you started at 8.4 million, and then you've made your way all the way down to the 7, and after that then you're in to the presence of God. And so you look at that and you think, I don't know how hard I'd have to try to keep on going and going and going and going to get to the point where I think I'm pleasing God. So there's just an endless cycle of trying to do this challenge of trying to please God, to get into God's presence. By hard enough, they say, and you may get there. But the truth of it is, all the complexities, all of those things are so far away from the actual truth, in the sense that when you look at the Bible, it's just so clear in terms of how you find your way to God, how God reveals himself to you. And the other major religion, obviously, Islam. Again, Islam will turn around and say the Jesus of the Bible is the Jesus of the Quran. We're the same. The God of the Bible is the God of the Quran, but we're not. We're completely different. So sorry. So it's. So you look at all of those things, and you question. You start questioning, where are we with, where am I with Christ? Who is Christ in all of this? Where does Christ actually come in, and what does Christ actually say? And for me, at the time of being sort of getting to the point of arriving at the crossroad of saying, Lord, I think you are who you say you are. You are the way, the truth, and the life. Definitive. There's no sharing it with anyone else. There is no other way. There is no other truth. And there certainly is no other life. And so for me, Hebrews chapter 13, 5 was, through 5 and 6, was my Bible verse that I had come to me, and has stayed with me all the way through my whole life. Where it just says, make sure that your character is free from the love of money, being content with what you have, for he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. So even through my persecution, even through my family rejecting me, even through feeling alone, to the point of in despair, where nothing seems to be going right, financially burdened, out of a job, no future, everything going wrong that could possibly go wrong, going wrong. And here we are, married, and we're having to literally get kicked out of the house, get ostracized, get cut off, told not to come back, no longer a son to my parents, ridiculed by our family and friends and everyone. But yet the word of God says, he said that I will never leave you nor forsake you. And it says, so that we may confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What will man do to me? And that was the verse that kept me going through everything. And when I look back at all the other religions that I'd come through and from, I look at that and I think, you know what? Nobody in their book ever said that I would never leave you nor forsake you. And the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What will man do to me? And to me, that was the assurance of Christ. That was the uniqueness of Christ, because he's saying that once he's got a hold of you, he's never going to let you go. He's never going to let you go, no matter what happens and no matter what situations you're in. Even when you feel you've lost absolutely everything, you've got nothing. But he said, I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. He said that, I'm not going to leave you. I've told you who I am. I know what you're going to go through. I know how it's going to be. But then it was always pointing to the cross. Because he said, if they did it to me, they're going to do it to you. And that was the strength for me. And to me, when I look at that, to sum it up in a simple way, the uniqueness of Christ is that he is with his believers. Every one of you. Every one of you. And the promise is there. He doesn't falter from his promises. He stands fast on them. He doesn't shake. He doesn't move. We do. We buckle. We sometimes, get to the point and think, no, it can't possibly be that God is going to take me out of this situation. But then, miraculously, God does. And if you all look back, I can look back at my life and think, you know what? How many times God has taken me out of situations where I did not know how I was going to get out of them. There's so many. So many. And that's why that verse, I will never leave you nor forsake you, so that we may confidently say, the Lord is my helper. He is my helper. He is the one that gives me the strength to carry on day by day. And when I look back, I thank the Lord that he did take me out of the Gurdwara. He did take me out of that place because I had a yearning of wanting to know who he was. I wanted to find God. And he said, well, if you do, what are you doing here? You need to be somewhere else. And that's my testimony. That's my Christ. That's my Jesus, who took me out from the world and gave me his word that is alive. And we say that it is the living word, and truly it is. And the more you look into it, the uniqueness of Christ, well, there's just so much, isn't there? So much that you could spend, I suppose, a whole year talking about that. But for me, that to me, in summary, is exactly that. It's that he has said that he'd never leave me nor forsake me. And he is my helper in the same way he is for every believer. He's never going to leave you nor forsake you. He's always going to be your helper. And I will not be afraid. What will man do to me? Even though you go through persecution and suffering. But he said, they did it to me, they'll do it to you. But be of courage, because he said, I have overcome the world.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Gian. That was. I mean, there is so much to say, isn't there? So, and those words are obviously so real, in terms of your lived experience. I don't know what each of us has had to give up or to suffer for our faith in Jesus, but what a thing to have to go through. So, thank you for sharing so personally with us this evening. We'll just there are some questions, so I'll just run through what I've got here. First one should be a fairly straightforward, quick answer, because it just says, do Sikhs have a holy book?
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
It's called the Guru Granth Sahib, and the thing with the holy book is that they see that as the living word, oddly enough, but not only the living word, but in the literal sense, that it actually is alive, it breathes, and so they will, I've never quite understood it, but they do, they'll take it and put it to bed. They'll also leave it a drink and food, and then they'll go and wake it up in the morning and then carry it back down into the hall. So they literally take it as a living thing. So we say that the Bible is the living word, but not in that sense. So although they'll say it is the living word, but they do then take it a bit further by saying that it's alive.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, the next question is a two-part question. The first part I think we can answer fairly quickly. The second part might take another year. So you can answer the first part, and then I'll encourage people to use the rest of the evening to find out the second part. The first part is, how did Raj feel when you became a Christian? That's still a big question, but maybe that's quicker than answering the second part, which says, how did she come to Christ? Yeah.
First part, simply put, when I did tell my wife that I'd become a Christian, she said, if I'd have known you was going to become a Christian, I wouldn't have married you. So that was her response to it, but praise the Lord that she stuck with me. The second part to that question, she come to know the Lord because for me, the key thing is, we're called to be a witness, and a witness is one that really lives the life of a believer, a true follower of Christ. And if you live a life that is pleasing to the Lord, then others around you will see that. And that's the key thing. And I used to have, my friend told me one day, he said, look, he goes, just if you're worried about things, just write it down on a piece of paper, what you're worried about, write it down. And I wrote it down, and the first thing was on my list was for my wife to know the Lord. And then there were other things. And it was really from that, and I think my wife ended up opening my Bible and reading my thing and said the first, my worry was crossed off, and it became the word prayer. And so I crossed the word worry and put the word prayer, and then it was the first one was for my wife to come to know the Lord. And so really that's where it started from, and then she did come to know the Lord.
That's wonderful. And that's an encouragement to those of us who perhaps are in relationships, marriages, where actually you are the only believer in the home, or if you're a child and your parents are not Christians. We've been looking through 1 Peter recently, haven't we, about that encouragement to live lives before our loved ones in such a way. And what a wonderful example and testimony of that. So praise the Lord for bringing you, Raj, to know Jesus as well. I'm going to group these couple of questions together. Hang on. Let me archive that and that. Okay. So, what advice would you give to followers of other religions or any atheists who are here tonight? And then I'm going to add part 2, which is, because it's a similar question, what would be the biggest mistake a Christian would make when witnessing to somebody of another religion? So if you can kind of bear that in.
I think if I answer the last question first, I think the biggest mistake anyone can really make is when you start really putting down somebody else's belief. That they may be sincere in what they believe, and they may be following it like I was following it to a T and thinking that I am absolutely correct in what I'm doing. But if you then start pointing fingers at X, Y, and Z, oh, this is what you're like, this is what... It doesn't sort of help the situation, because it just creates an atmosphere, and it gets their back up, and somebody then is suddenly defending something. My question to everyone always is that you all say we're all going to go to God, all paths lead to God, and in one sense, ultimately they do. You have to give an account. You ask anybody, they'll all say, oh yes, you have to give an account. You'll have to give an account before God. So I said, in that respect, I would agree with you that you do have to give an account. All your paths will take you to God. The question mark is, Who has the power to forgive sin? That's the question. Who has the power or the authority to forgive sin? And there's only one name that has been given on earth, in heaven, that has that power to forgive sins. None of the gurus can. None of the deities can. Buddha can't. Muhammad can't. None of them can. And so, therefore, it's not a pointy finger at, oh, we're better than you, or any of that. Absolutely not. Because if we're all in the search for God, and we're all in that path to have a relationship with God, then surely the one that can forgive your sins and then put that bridge across to God, that's a different thing. More importantly as well, we call God Abba Father. We call him Father. Nobody else does. Sikhs don't. Hindus don't. Muslims don't. They can't even say that, Father. That's alien. But we do, because we've been given that right to be able to be called the sons and daughters. We have that. And that's what's unique. So the question mark then is to talk about, when we talk about, again, the uniqueness of Jesus Christ. The uniqueness is that he takes us over from being alien with God to being sons, daughters, where we are able to say, he's my Father.